Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Efrain Escobedo. I'm president and CEO of the Center for Nonprofit Management, and I serve as the vice chair for the Unite LA board. And on behalf of myself, our colleagues, and the amazing Unite LA team, we want to welcome you to Unite LA's Education Means Business webinar, Empowering Youth in Los Angeles County and throughout California. Unite LA as a nonprofit is an organization bridging and building relationships between business and the education communities, and we've been doing it for over 25 years. On Cradle Through Career policy and systemic issues facing low-income communities, we seek to shed light on critical Cradle Through Career issues by bringing partners from all sectors to help not just identify the issues creating structural barriers for our youth, but to identify solutions for some of California's most challenging issues within the Cradle to Career pipeline. Before we delve into the main content, I want to take just a brief moment to acknowledge the current global events. They're tough, they're hard to watch, and they impact us every day. Understanding that the impact they may have on all of us is critical, and emphasizing the importance of coming together could never be more important. Even in this virtual space, to learn, share, and support one another, we want to model what will get us through tough times like those we live in today. Now, as of 2021, there were more than 570,000 youth in California, ages 16 through 24, who were neither in school nor at work. Youth disconnection is a crisis that requires urgent action, especially in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has erased years of progress in reducing youth who are disconnected from education and the workforce. And even more alarmingly, as we know what happens with disconnected youth. In California, Black youth in particular, who drop out of high school or are unable to attain a high school diploma, have an over 95% chance of coming into contact with the justice system and entering the dreaded prison pipeline. Today's conversation will shed light on the challenges faced by our youth who are eager to enter the workforce, help transform our region, our economy, and we hope to explore policy solutions and share examples of how each of us can contribute to realizing that energy and those dreams for our future, who are our youth. Provide further context to this conversation, we've asked our very capable team to put together a short data presentation for you. And I'm delighted now then to introduce Unite LA's Senior Manager of Workforce Development and Policy, Edgar Castillo, and Director of Workforce Systems and Policy, Amber Chapman, who will both provide a presentation on data and subsequently help facilitate a very important conversation. We're also delighted that later on in our program, we'll be joined by the indomitable Assembly Majority Leader, Isaac Bryan. So Edgar, the floor is yours.
All right, well, thank you, Efrain, and just want to say good afternoon, everybody, and thank you all for joining us on today's webinar. I'm really excited to share a short presentation with you today, very short, that will help give you a bit of context of today's discussion. And I do want to say that Unite LA will be giving you all a sneak peek to some of the Opportunity Youth data that we will also be highlighting in our Opportunity Youth case statement, which will be released soon and as a follow-up to today's webinar. So give me 1 second as I pull up the presentation and share my screen. Let's see. All right. Let me know if you can see it. But all right. So like I said, I do want to share some pertinent information about California's Opportunity Youth and the makeup of the state. So before I start, I do want to say that the data presented here today is 2021 data for Opportunity Youth. So I hope that clears up questions that any of you may have. So Who are California's opportunity youth? How do we define opportunity youth? So United Way defines opportunity youth as 16 to 24-year-olds who are disconnected from school and work and are also system involved. So that includes foster and former foster youth, justice involved, and unhoused or housing insecure. And as you can see, the state has over 570,000 disconnected youth, which is about 1 in 8 16 to 24-year-old Californians overall. Now, I think one of the biggest questions that we also hear is how has youth disconnection really been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic? How are things changed after the pandemic? And as you can really see here, it only exacerbated the problem as disconnection increased by 90,000 from 2019 to 2021. Another data point that I really want to share with everyone here today is the educational attainment among disconnected youth, where 82% have at least a high school diploma or equivalent. So I do want to share that this is not necessarily a high school dropout problem, but rather an effort to really engage youth as soon as they exit high school with a pathway to education or a career pathway. In fact, 86% of California's opportunity youth are between the ages also of 19 to 24 years old. So, which also showcases that 14% are between the 16 to 18 years old, which makes sense because 16 to 18-year-olds are most likely are in high school and they're not disconnected. Next slide. So youth disconnection by race, ethnicity, and gender. I do want to share that youth disconnection is not just a BIPOC issue. It is important to call out, though, that the disconnection rates are not equitable, as Black men and women have the highest rates of disconnection at Black men at 29.5% and Black women at 26.2%, compared to 13.18% white women and 13.5% of white men. But this is a problem that really affects everyone and requires urgent action from our policymakers. And the last slide I have for you all today is really just showcasing the breakdown of youth disconnection by county. And and as you can see, Los Angeles has the highest number of disconnected youth at around 140, over 143,000 and 12.9% disconnection rate. So this really further exemplifies the importance of today's conversation with the Assembly Majority Leader and the need for our state to take urgent action and work with their regions and communities to lower the number of disconnected youth in our state. So before I end this whole presentation, I do want to ask Amber if she has anything more to add.
Thank you so much, Edgar, for breaking down and getting us kind of oriented on who we are talking about today. Before we close this part out, I would love to hear what some of the work United LA is doing to help reduce the number of opportunity youth that are in Los Angeles. Could you share a bit about the work with the Opportunity Youth Collaborative and the Los Angeles Performance Partnership Pilot?
Yeah, definitely. And really good point to highlight. So United LA is a co-convener of the Opportunity Youth Collaborative with the Alliance for Children's Rights and John Burden Advocates for Youth. The OIC, the Opportunity Youth Collaborative, is also the OIC, which is a collective impact initiative that works to build and strengthen bridges among public agencies, service organization, educational institutions, and employers to better connect youth with education and opportunity. The LAP3 work, which is the Los Angeles Performance Partnership Pilot, it's a mouthful, is a leading effort of the city of LA, the county of LA, and LAUSD, LACCD, Los Angeles Community College District, the local Cal State University, CSU5 here in LA, and the OYC, and many other public, philanthropic, partners to really improve the service delivery system for disconnected youth, young adult population, and improve their educational, workforce, housing, and social well-being. So right now, LAP3 is currently in the middle of creating a new strategic plan, and we have outlined proposed goals and strategies, which will be published in the beginning of 2024. But one of the overall main goals is to reduce the youth disconnection, which you saw 143,000, reduce it by 32,000 in Los Angeles. A 32 reduction, I should say 32,000 reduction from the 143K. So I know I just saw the majority leader, so I'll stop there. And thank you all for listening.
Thank you. Back to you, Efrain, to introduce the majority leader. Thank you.
Thank you, Amber, Edgar. Fantastic job, sir. Thank you for walking us through that data. And now it's my privilege and very humbled to introduce my brother and a tireless warrior, I think, over the years, not just for our youth, but in really advancing true racial justice and equity. It's my pleasure to introduce our state majority leader of California, Isaac Bryan, who is one of our own here from LA, and he represents California's 55th Assembly District. And so if you don't know, and having cruised it, it's a district that includes Baldwin Hills, Crenshaw, Culver City, Ladera Heights, Mar Vista, Delray, Palms, the Pico Robertson area, Beverly Grove, Mid-Wilshire, and parts of South Los Angeles. I think that district in and of itself represents not just high need, but tremendous promise and where our future lies. And so in addition to serving as majority leader, however, it's important to share that he also chairs, here's my English learner part coming out a bit, the Assembly's first Select Committee on Poverty and Economic Inclusion. Can't really work on something if you're not being intentional and elevating it. In 2022, he was then also elected as Secretary and Treasurer of the California Legislative Black Caucus. He's a founding member and the Vice Chair of the Renters Caucus in the legislature. Some of his legislative accomplishments have already been having critical impacts on our ability to seek justice and transform our communities. That includes phasing out the Inglewood oil field and other oil drilling near residential areas and communities in California's SB 1137, ending prison gerrymandering with AB 1848, eliminating punitive fees for parents with children in foster care with AB 1686, protecting students from predatory insurance practices, and strengthening requirements for online campaign finance disclosure, both building justice, ensuring democracy, and I gotta say, has had impacts even before the legislature. And I got a majority leader give you still kudos for your transformative work before your policymaker days in ushering in transformative structural changes like fighting for Measure J, which is impacts are being seen now. He received his master's of public policy from UCLA and bachelor's degree in political science and sociology from the University of Arizona. So Pac-12 through and through. And I'm, again, just humbled that he joined us today and really add his critical voice and the voice of the thousands of youth that he continues to work with. Our majority leader, Isaac Bryan.
Well, thank you, and truly humbled and grateful to be with you. And it's good to see you, brother. He was being kind, but Efrain and I have been doing this work together for a very long time, wearing many different hats in many different spaces. And I think it's that kind of collaboration through the years. All people who care about making a difference in the community, that's how we make that change, by staying in coalition, by staying in solidarity and uplifting one another as we each climb towards making the difference that we're striving for. Thank you all for having me today, especially to talk about the youth and youth opportunities. I still consider myself young at heart. I'm the youngest legislator from Los Angeles in the state assembly. I turned 31 years old this year, but I was elected at 29. I'm the youngest Black majority leader the state of California has ever had. I grew up in a family where youth was an everyday thought and occurrence. My parents were foster parents for 26 years, and they adopted 9 of us. Nearly 200 children came in and out of my house. And so thinking about opportunity, thinking about challenges, struggle, thinking about the future, perseverance, it's been something that I've done my entire life. Part of the reason I became a policymaker is because I saw some of the pitfalls that our youth were getting trapped into, that my own siblings were getting trapped into, that I almost got trapped in. I didn't graduate from middle school. And that was kind of a big turning point for me, because most children graduate from middle school, but you needed a 1.0 average in language arts and math, and I didn't have it. And in not graduating from middle school, that's a surefire step to stepping into the school to prison pipeline. That's a pretty early indicator of some tough times ahead. And for me, I was able to navigate those and ultimately end up at UCLA. But for a number of my siblings, they never made it to college. They made it to incarceration. They made it to being unhoused, underpaid, underemployed. Right now, it's the same neighborhoods where our youth live next to environmental hazards, have the lowest performing schools, have the lowest income, have the highest unemployment rate, and the most police presence. That's where our youth who have the fewest opportunities are all located. And it's because we're investing in all of these systems of harm instead of systems of care and opportunity and well-being. Those are the reasons why I ran for office. Those are the reasons why many of you are organizing, because we need to change the conditions of life for people in our communities and give our young people a fighting chance. Our young people deserve to have better outcomes than what we have. But that's not the case right now. In fact, for our young girls and women and people on the gender spectrum who identify with reproductive freedom rights and liberties, those have been rolled back for the first time in 2 decades. This is the first generation that is going backwards. For our young people who are born into poverty, this is the hardest time to transition from poverty to higher economic mobility levels. You are more likely to stay in struggle than exit struggle unless we make those changes. That's what we're organizing for. That's what we're trying to do in the state legislature. Some of the ways that I focus on that work start with education. We've got to make sure the pipeline from K through 12 education into higher education stays strong. And so we've increased slots for California students in our UC system. We have the greatest college system in the country here in California. Not enough California students are able to make it into it. So we've got to increase that pipeline. We've got to make sure that access to trades and other types of vocational learning stay robust. We passed a bill in our first year because we found that a lot of Black and brown youth who are studying to learn a trade or an apprenticeship program were dropping out of community college, not because they didn't want to learn the skill that would earn them a livable wage, but because they couldn't afford to go to school and live at the same time. So we passed a bill that was going to pay folks, we call it the Higher Up Initiative, pay you a livable wage for every hour you're in the classroom. If you're working to better yourself, we should be making the investments that allow you to do that. This year, we passed more legislation with Nancy Skinner and others to end more of the willful defiance and the school pushouts that happen on campus. So many of our Black, brown, poor, and Indigenous students are pushed out of the classroom, not because they're doing anything wrong, but because they feel disconnected from the school setting and their behavior is not being addressed through a lens of care and opportunity. It's being criminalized, subjugated, and expelled from the classroom. We've got to change that. We've got to keep our children in school. You can't expect children to thrive if we push them out of the school setting and then demand excellence from them. So we're continuing to do that work. We've got to take care of all of the negative externalities in the community. There's no reason that the only civic infrastructure we should be investing in poor communities is law enforcement. We should be investing in thriving schools. We should be investing in public health infrastructure. We should be investing in food infrastructure. In my neighborhood, I pass 4 liquor stores before I pass a grocery store. That has an impact on our young people's ability to grow and thrive. You can't have a healthy community that is also a food desert. Those things cannot go hand in hand. And so there are a number of critical issues that you all are organizing to be on the forefront of making a difference in. And the state legislature, we've got to do the same. It also, in my mind, means letting more young people into these positions of power. We shouldn't make decisions about the youth without the youth at the table. And we shouldn't put barriers to running for political office that are rooted in ageism and less in ability. We have so many talented young people who can make a difference, who deserve an opportunity to serve in whatever capacity best utilizes their talents. I want to thank you all for letting me join you today and be a part of this conversation. Oftentimes in Sacramento, it can be pretty isolating being a young legislator, but being home in the district and being in spaces like this, I'm reminded of the two generations that are organizing and mobilizing for the future for those of us who are here now, and for the future for those of us who are coming after. And it's that forward looking, that forward thinking, and that forward mobilization that I think is going to make all of the difference. So again, thank you for gathering. Thank you for coming together. And thank you for allowing me to be a part of the conversation.
Majority Leader, the pleasure is all ours, and we continue to stand in solidarity, ready to put in the work. And more importantly, just want to thank you for what you uplifted, which is the real transformative change we're trying to make is bringing more leadership that is intersectional, that has the lived experience, and that's willing to go those extra steps and extra miles to make some true change. So thank you for the tireless efforts and for joining us today, because I know you're busy and you're all over the place. So we really appreciate you, brother.
Absolutely. Thank you for your leadership, and thank you all.
Hello.
Over to you.
Thank you, Ephraim. Hello, Majority Leader. How are you today?
I'm doing all right.
Real powerful in the space, so I really appreciate all that you've shared so far. We do have a couple of questions for you. You ready to talk to us a little bit?
Absolutely.
All right. Well, you're rounding 2 years in the legislature. What have been some of the highlights of your first 2 years that you could share with us? And specifically, share a bit about your experience going from a historical surplus in your first year to the recession the following year.
Yeah, so with the surplus, we tried to invest resources in a lasting way for some of the major problems that were coming up on the horizon. For example, the first budget ask I ever put in was to establish a reproductive health law and policy institute at the UCLA Law School. The first one in the country in preparation for the rollback of Roe v. Wade. We also passed a homeless hiring tax credit where we went to businesses and we said, look, if you hire someone who is unhoused, we will pay half of that salary. We'll put some money up. We'll make a public investment because we know our folks on the street can do a phenomenal job if given the opportunity. And if you're afraid to give them the opportunity, then let us pay for some of that risk. We also did some work to stop the fines and fees that are being levied on parents who lose their children to the child welfare system. We used to charge you child support if you lost your kids to the child welfare system. The problem is you don't lose custody of your children because you had a lot of resources. In fact, we weren't even collecting this money. We were just ruining the credit and the financial stability of these families. So we ended that practice in California last year. And because we ended it in California, the federal government has ended that practice across the country. And so we're trying to take these steps. We've made meaningful investments in climate change. We passed a bill that would stop neighborhood oil drilling. It was SB 1137. The second we passed it, though, the oil companies spent $30 million to referendum the bill and put it back on the ballot to try to confuse voters. And when they did that this past year, we changed the referendum process to make it harder for them to do that in the future. So every time we make change, they push back and we push back harder. And that's been the story of the last 2 years. We are in a budget deficit right now, but California still has the 5th largest economy in the world. We've got nearly $300 billion, and we've got to make sure we invest it in the things that matter most.
Thank you. As we heard from Edgar's presentation, as of 2021, there were more than 570,000 opportunity youth in California. In Los Angeles alone, there's 143,463. We just want to make sure we get that exact number. We define opportunity youth as youth who are either disconnected from school and work and or system involved. So that includes our foster youth, those who are justice involved, and those who are unhoused or at risk of being unhoused. Last year, United LA supported your foster youth hiring tax credit bill, AB 1861, where qualifying employers would receive a scaling tax credit of up to $10,000 for each eligible transition age foster youth at extreme risk of homelessness that you spoke of, that they employ in a taxable year. Can you share insights on other recent legislative successes or proposals aimed at improving educational and career opportunities for young people that look to decrease the overall number of OY in our region and state?
Yeah, absolutely. The higher up tax or higher up program that I mentioned earlier, where we were paying for young people to attend their college classes. For every hour you spent in the classroom studying for an apprenticeship or a livable wage job, we were going to pay you a livable wage for that. That was a major one. For our foster youth, I had a really big bill last year that was vetoed by the government, wow, by the governor, supported bipartisanly through the legislature, and it was AB 1512. Right now, if you've lost your parents, you are due survivor benefits. Everybody, your parents pay into Social Security, they won't withdraw it, you're due survivor benefits. If you're in the child welfare system, the county can apply for those benefits on your behalf. Now, what you and I think they should do with it is probably set it aside for you because these are your benefits. That's not what currently happens. They just incorporate it into the bottom line. They treat it like another federal revenue stream. So we had a bill that would require them to set this money aside for our youth because we know nearly 40% of foster youth end up unhoused at some point after aging out of the system or transitioning out. And so giving them a financial base of resources that belong to them is something that we tried really hard to secure this year. We came just short, but that's going to be an ongoing fight. I've been a supporter of different universal basic income programs and pilots that are aimed at giving our youth a fighting chance. There's a big one here in the 2nd district of LA County and in the 9th council district of LA City, but the state has to get more involved. I think in a deficit, what we tend to do is we tend to cut the resources and programs from our young people and from some of the communities who need them first. It's going to be a priority of mine to make sure that that's not how we handle this downturn. There are places in subsidies and other areas where our resources are going that aren't needed. The one place where they are for sure needed, and even more of them are needed, is in our young people.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for sharing about some of those bills you've led and some of the continued fight that will be happening to support young folks in a strong transition into adulthood. In 2018, Governor Newsom set an ambitious goal of reaching 500,000 active apprentices by 2029. This is a huge, huge task. Last year, there was a lot of investment dedicated to new apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship programs, but there was only one that called out Opportunity Youth specifically, which was the California Youth Apprenticeship Grant Program. As we look at the implementation of all of these different apprenticeship programs, employers need to also be at the center of the conversation. So my question to you is, how can state policies encourage employers to provide more work-based learning opportunities, apprenticeships, and internships for young individuals, which will enable them to gain valuable skills and experiences?
I think we've got to build those tables and have those conversations about how we can be helpful. Those public-private partnerships, when they're in service of our youth and our young people, are incredibly important. Too often, though, we talk in silos. We've got opportunity youth organizing spaces, we've got employer organizing spaces, we've got worker organizing spaces, and they don't all talk to each other. They certainly don't all sit at the table and come to solutions. And so you have my commitment to help build some of those tables, come up with some of those solutions, and implement them in policy. We've got to bring everybody in, and then we've got to take those actions and turn them into legislation. And I'm in my 2nd year now, and so I haven't accomplished everything that I want to do just yet, but I have no doubt there's a lot more we can do together.
Love to hear that. Just as a follow-up, I'm curious to hear from you. What are some of the kind of recommendations or things off the top of your head you think would be important for employers to kind of address in an effort to bring in the new wave of talent into their organizations? What are some of those things that you can think of? I know we've had a number of different initiatives thinking about Ban the Box, really focused on smart justice, really second chance hiring, things focused on those with justice backgrounds. What are some of those things that you think we can support employers with thinking about and reimagining to support young people coming into employment?
I think we've got to double down on all of those efforts, right? We've got to make sure we're looking at youth who have been incarcerated in the juvenile justice system. We've got to make sure that we're looking at targeted local hire, that you're hiring youth who come from the communities that you're serving in. Small businesses tend to do a good job of that, particularly if they're small businesses of color or women-led organizations. But I think we've got a lot of large corporations and organizations that operate in certain communities that should also have an interest in hiring from those local communities. We've got to make sure that our public investments continue to hire from the communities. And when we say hire from the communities, I think there needs to be, as you've mentioned, an intentional focus on opportunity youth. If you're not talking about things with that kind of specificity, you leave folks out. And we can't continue to leave folks out, especially when we've got all of these new infrastructure dollars coming from the federal government. I mean, we are building things, and we've got to make sure that our young people are not only at the table for designing the future that we build, but are actively getting paid to participate in building that future with us. And so those are the things that are front of mind for me. I think we've got to have those conversations with employers. I think we've got to have those conversations in the public sector too. There's a lot of hiring opportunity and a lot of resources and contracting opportunity that comes out of the state, the county, and the city and the federal government. And we've got to make sure that all of those opportunities come with a need and a requirement that our young people and our young people from neighborhoods who need the support the most are brought into the fold.
I'm so happy that you've said that, because recently, if I can just shift us a little, the Governor Newsom recent executive order signed that charges the state's educational and legislative leaders with creating a master plan for career education. Advocates across the state believe there are opportunities to elevate opportunity youth in the plans. What suggestions do you have for partners to incorporate OY in the plan? And are there opportunities for you to help ensure it's folded in the discussion in the final plan?
Absolutely. And this is a very serious conversation. And we've transitioned a number of terms, right? Vocational training, career education, all of these things that have slight nuances between them. My concern when I was a kid growing up, particularly when it came to, apprenticeship pipelines versus four-year colleges, and the old saying, college isn't for everybody. And I always wondered, which youth is it not for? Because I felt like I was one of those, that you were going to steer me this way. If you got to decide for me which route was mine, it would have been this route, not graduating from UCLA with my master's degree. And so while we continue to build up the career training and the career education that allows for young people to come straight out of high school into apprenticeship programs, into learning the kind of skills that will allow them to secure a livable wage form of employment for their entire career, that's really, really important. But I don't want us to limit the capacity of our opportunity youth. I want to make sure that all pathways are open, and that whatever way our young people decide they'd like to live their life and they would like to direct their career, their resources, their talent, I want them to be able to succeed in that pipeline. But I don't think that that's the role of the government or other folks to decide for our young people which pipeline they belong to. And the problem is right now, we haven't created the opportunity structures for them to allow to choose for themselves. And so many are falling through the cracks. And I think when we work with our young people and on behalf of our young people, we can make these differences. And so I would like to see that master plan continue to include career education to make sure that it's folded in a meaningful and robust way, but not in a way that predetermines which set of our young people belong this way and which set belong this way. I think in some respects that will continue to widen the opportunity gaps, even if we might be lifting the overall bottom.
Just gonna let that sit for a second, because that's important. It's important for us to remember to be focused on the individual and allow them to be the decision maker, the leader in decision making for where their lives should go. Youth voice is so key because it's most times always very aspirational. As you know, homelessness is not only a priority in Los Angeles, but also for our state. In the presentation that Edgar shared earlier, he highlighted that there were 16,000 housing insecure youth in California. Are there specific legislative strategies that you believe can help bridge the gap between education and workforce development programs and services aimed at preventing and alleviating homelessness among youth?
Absolutely. I mean, one, when it comes to our youth, we're not investing enough resources from our homeless resources to capture our youth. We know that if our young people fall into housing insecurity or houselessness, it is more expensive to get them off the streets both in the short term and the long term. You don't want to normalize this process by which our young people who age out of foster care, who come out of the juvenile justice system, who come from certain communities, you don't want to normalize this process that they start out on the streets. That's a priority investment. And there have been many coalitions pushing for 25% of all homeless resources or certain percentages to go to our young people. I'm a willing and able partner in those conversations to make sure that we increase those allocations so that our young people are a prime focus in our prevention effort. We also have to recognize that these things are interconnected with other problems. Our housing conversation and our youth homelessness conversation are like this. In the state legislature, there are 120 elected officials. There are 5 of us who don't own a home, just 5. In Los Angeles County, there's only 1, and it's me. And so that's a reality that our young people are really dealing with. No one under 24, 25, 35 almost is owning a home in Los Angeles right now. And so when you're fighting for tenant protections, when you're fighting to keep people who are one check away from losing their foundation, their financial security, when you're fighting for those folks, you are fighting for our young people. You are fighting for their opportunity as well. And I think that's a conversation we have to be willing to have. If you're looking directly at homelessness, but you're not looking at tenant rights and tenant protection or home ownership, and you're not looking at the labor market and wages and making sure that those rise with the cost of living, then you're not fully addressing this problem in a holistic way. And that's something that I'd like to continue to look at and break down those silos so we're having a full conversation.
Thank you so much for sharing these exciting opportunities and the pipeline for opportunity to youth and all of the work and the advocacy that you're doing in Sacramento. I want to move us into the Q&A portion of this webinar and encourage participants to enter questions in the chat feature. You'll see that at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to go ahead and add your questions in. We have a few questions that came in advance as folks registered for this webinar that I want to share with you. The first is, what role can technology and online education play in expanding opportunities for disconnected youth, especially in light of the digital divide?
That's an amazing question. And I think that's two-part. One, we've got to close the digital divide, right? Because if you can't have access to online learning, if you can't connect to the internet. So we've got to make sure that we lay those fibers and we make sure the connectivity is a real thing. I was part of a coalition that went to the governor at the end of session when the conversations about phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 broadband build out didn't include South LA. South LA was in phase 2, but Beverly Hills was in phase 1. That was a concern. And so we went and secured a commitment from the governor to make sure that the broadband infrastructure needed for South LA will be built and will be invested in next year's budget. So closing the digital divide is essential to answering that first question. Is online access and online tools. I think you've got to meet people where they are. The pandemic taught us this, right? That we can be highly efficient and we can accomplish many, many things from a laptop, from a Zoom meeting, from a recorded conversation. That, there's so many pressures on our young people to work and take care of themselves and take care of their families and take care of others, that it's not always practical or realistic for them to also traverse to college campuses, especially with the cost of travel or the lack of public infrastructure, public transit infrastructure to get them from A to B. And so the proliferation of online programs, I think, is an important thing to keep in mind. What we need to make sure of, though, is the quality of that programming is not less than. That having any form of online education is not seen in the labor market or in the employer market as kind of less than any other way of learning. And so I think maybe a hybrid model is going to be the ultimate path forward. And I think that's not just for folks who are commuting and young people who have a hard time getting to campuses. I think that's the way that education is shifting by and large altogether.
Thank you. Another question. We heard that over 80% of disconnected youth already have a high school diploma. Is there enough accountability within the K-12 system to supporting young people in the transition to post-secondary education and careers after high school? How can we improve college career guidance and transitions after graduation?
No, absolutely not. No way is it sufficient enough. I know that even from my own personal experience. The reason in the bio that was read earlier said I went to the University of Arizona is because I couldn't get into a California school. The reason I couldn't get into a California school is because I didn't meet the A through G requirements. I didn't meet the A through G requirements at the time because I went to 3 different high schools. And I slipped through the cracks, and my counselors lost track of me, and I was short a fine art class, which would have made me eligible for a CSU and a UC. It wasn't math, it wasn't English, it wasn't foreign language, it was a fine art, which was one of the A through G requirements that I didn't have on my transcript, so I couldn't go to a California college. There are countless young people who are moving between schools, who are moving between places and spaces with high levels of responsibilities, and our education system is not built to meet their whole needs. And it's not a knock on our teachers by any means. Teachers have become both, or they've become educators, they've become therapists, they've become caregivers, they've become food providers, they've become, parental figures in many instances. They've become so many things for our young people, and still the entire learning environment as a whole, I don't think is meeting the full challenge. And so we've got to make the investments that allow our school sites to make up for the deficiencies in communities. It's got to be the one place in a community where everything you need is there, including the tools that allow you to transcend from high school to higher education, if that's the pathway that you choose.
Thank you. We have another question. Given budget constraints, what strategies do you suggest for securing funding for programs and initiatives that benefit Opportunity Youth?
I think you'd be very clear about the impact. The most powerful thing in Sacramento is when you come up and you say, hey, I need X $1 million or even X $1 billion. And in securing this, it will do Y. And that you can show that tangible impact, and you can show the way that solving this problem or this investment relates to other problems and homelessness and education and housing or whatever the state as a whole may need. I think the stronger the correlation between that investment and a good outcome, the more likely you are to get it. Although I will say, from what I've heard, the most recent estimates, we're in a bit of trouble going into next year. This past year, we created a state budget without all of the income taxes that we would normally get in April. The federal government moved the deadline to October, so we moved the deadline to October, which is kind of crazy because we passed the budget in June. So we basically just guessed about how much money we have in June. And I've been told that that guess is off by potentially as much as 30%. So when we come back in January, we're actually going to be looking at places that we've got to take these resources back. And so not only do we need the proposals of where to put money, some of us are going to have to stand on the front lines and say, hey, you're not touching this money. Like this money's for our young people. We need that. It's got to come from over here.
Thank you. We have another question. In what ways can the government collaborate with local communities, nonprofits, and businesses to create a holistic support system for Opportunity Youth? So speaking to some of those additional supports that are needed to support young people in moving through education and into employment, what are some of those things?
I think it's got to be a two-part relationship. I think you need elected officials who actually go out into their community, who meet with the community-based organizations who are doing this work day in and day out, providing a holistic set of care infrastructures for our young people. And I also think we've got to provide access for these same community institutions to have access to coming up to Sacramento and sharing their work. I think we've got to have that conversation, but the burden, in my opinion, is not on the community-based organizations, it's on us. If your elected officials in your area don't know who you are or the work that you're doing, that's their fault, but it's not an excuse for you not to continue to reach out and invite them to be a part of this conversation. Government doesn't have all of the answers. I actually think most of the answers come from the people who are most impacted in community. And so we've got to uplift those answers to the policymaking arena. Whatever I can do to be helpful with it, I will. It's part of the reason we created the Select Committee on Poverty and Economic Inclusion. It was to provide a vehicle for those voices to be heard in Sacramento. But there's a lot more work to do. And I think especially in times of a harsh budget, it's even more important to be better connected with the grassroots that are doing this work so that you understand what programs and what lines of funding are absolutely vital.
Well, unfortunately, we have reached our time for this portion, but if you have any additional questions that you want to ask, please feel free to reach out to anyone with Unite LA to relay your message. Majority Leader, do you have any closing thoughts before we say goodbye to you today?
Just that forums like this are so critically important. So thank you all at Unite LA and everybody who's joined today to have this conversation. And thank you again for letting me be a part of it.
Well, thank you, Majority Leader, for sharing your insights and engaging in this critical conversation with us. Your participation is deeply appreciated, and we look forward to continuing the dialogue and working together towards positive policy solutions for opportunity youth in our state. We'll transition to our next speaker with Mr. David Crippens, Unite LA board member, who will give us a local update on some of the advancements that have been made in Los Angeles. David Crippens' experience includes 32 years of public service with a focus on education to career. Among his many accomplishments, he has raised over $70 million for programs and educational services for KCETV and has been a Unite LA board member for 25 years. He served on the City of Los Angeles Workforce Development Board since its inception. In this capacity, he serves as the current chair of the Youth Council, which recommends and approves eligible providers of youth workforce activities and conducts oversight of those programs. Hello, David. Thank you for joining us today. How are you doing?
Good day. Good day. Amber, before we go much, that was an impressive presentation by the Majority Leader of the State Assembly. I am in his district, but I have never met him. But I was deeply impressed by his breadth of knowledge, his commitment. I did not realize that of how he was raised and being a part of the foster system and understanding it, and having a breadth of saying, here's what's what. But what was, I think, was important for all of us to hear, he was straightforward in saying, look, folks, next year in the budget is going to be rough. And he was pointing out what who in this workforce and youth area, what we may have to do. So I was deeply impressed by all of that, very impressed.
I couldn't agree more, David. Yes, very powerful. And I'm still processing a lot of what was said, but I do agree that call to action that was so clearly stated is an opportunity for all of us on this call to be really thoughtful and collaborative around ways to support opportunity youth. We're excited to hear from you, an update from what's going on with the city and what it's doing to lower the amount of opportunity youth in LA.
Well, and I'm going to talk from two points. One is what is happening with the Workforce Development Board, where we have all 14 or more youth serving agencies, and the new Youth Development Department headed by the General Manager, Lisa Salazar. The Workforce Development System redid the youth system about 2 years ago. And there were three major foci there, and the Majority Leader spoke to these, whether he knew it or not. One was we need a seamless system. We must serve the whole youth, not just in health, not just in education, not just in jobs, not just in money or whatever it may be, but the system must be seamless. We must understand that we're in an area where there is great transition. People move from place to place. The other that he emphasized, and I had not realized that of his age, of being the youngest member in the assembly from Los Angeles, is the empowerment of youth. It is important that we who are adults and whatever, we must create situations where youth feel that they are a part of, that they have a say-so. This becomes more and more important as the days go on. And I think the pandemic put us back in that in terms of youth empowerment. And our systems have to put more energy in terms of youth empowerment. The other is wellness. I had said, when we had our youth council meeting last week, I talked about the importance of mental health. And this is what we needed to do. And one of the persons who was head of a youth serving agency said, David, I know you said mental health, but really what we're talking about is wellness. And the person who told me that was absolutely correct. We all gone through something that we were not prepared for. And this, the pandemic, and it especially hit youth hard. And we must look at things that are help our youth in terms of wellness, and those who are serving youth in terms of wellness. And this was, we are in the workforce system doing peer-to-peer counseling, and that is just beginning now. We're going to see how that happens. We're going to have to expand and look more and more in terms of wellness. You know, the majority leader, Mr. Bryan, said something which encapsulates all of this, of why we do what we do. We must provide that all pathways are open to our youth, that they're not segregated, they're not set off, they need to understand what's out there, what's available. I liked what he said. All pathways should be open to for our young people. That's what we should be dedicated to. And I hope that from our work source system and from our youth development department, that this is what is driving us. And I know that it is, but I continue to hope that we will expand on that. One last thing on this. Homelessness is something that we have to be more and more concerned about. In LA City, 9% of those who have housing which is unsecured, or they're in the homelessness, 9% of that are young people between 16 and 24. This is absolutely essential that we pay more attention, and Mr. Bryan talked about that. But in all many of the programs that we're doing, see, we're at the part with youth and looking at this. We're at the part of prevention. How do we help young people so that they can become self-contributing? That is absolutely key, and that must be a driver. And we must look at our part in terms of alleviation of homelessness, that we're in the prevention side. There is so much going on. This is an exciting time for all of us. Now, even though Mr. Bryant pointed out that our revenues may be down in the state government by 30%, we can't let that deter us and say, oh, here we go again. We're going to have to look at ways of how we can be more creative. How do we stretch our programs? How do we stretch every dollar? We've been through this before, but we can prepare ourselves. We can be a part of the solution. I'll stop there, Amber. But I was so excited by Mr. Bryan's words.
Same. And, you know, I really appreciate you really laying out for us clearly what some of the priorities are for YDD, as well as the Workforce Development Board. Like, speaking specifically to the Los Angeles Performance, LAP3, the Los Angeles Performance Partnership Pilot Strategic Planning, how will that be embedded in the City of LA's Workforce Development Board strategic planning?
Well, we're anxiously awaiting their strategic plan, and we will be looking very closely at where does that fit with where these departments are going. And I had hoped we got a preview of it, of the P3 plan at our youth council meeting last week, and I'm really looking forward to it. And I would imagine that a lot of the plan will include of what Mr. Bryant was talking about and what I was talking about. And I think one of the major things is creating the seamless system of serving youth. What will it take to further the seamless system? You know, one of the disconnects with many of us, as you look at it, has been between education and careers and career pathways. And that's what, you know, Mr. Bryant was talking about, all pathways being open. What do we need to do to create this seamless system? And this is what I hope P3 and their strategic plan will bring about. Let me just give a little history of how P3 came about. In the waning days of the Obama administration, which seems so many years ago, the Obama administration said, look, we want to look at some of the policies, especially as it serves youth, governmental policies. What are some of the barriers that stand in the way? And we will fund areas around the country to look at how to remove some of these barriers, regulations, and so forth. The the Economic Development Department or Community Development Department jumped on that with the county government and basically offered here were some of the barriers. And so, but what it really helped create was for the city and county to work closer together in serving of youth. Now, it has evolved more in terms of how do we create this seamless system. And this becomes important if we really want to help young people become self-contributing citizens.
Well, David, as always, you are a wealth of knowledge and the time goes too quickly. Before we let you go, are there any parting thoughts or words that you would like to share with our audience today who are concerned with and are supporting and advocating on behalf of Opportunity Youth?
We need to do more webinars like this, not only Unite LA, but other groups, so that we can share, so that we can offer intelligence about what is going on. This is going to be a upcoming challenging year, but can be one where we can consolidate some of the great things that the Assemblyman talked about, and that and we'll look at how we further serve youth. And I am very hopeful that we can do it, but we've got to keep sharing with each other.
Well, thank you so much, David, for sharing your updates and your continued leadership in the city of Los Angeles around workforce development supports to Opportunity Youth. I want to begin closing out this webinar by thanking our speakers today for their conversations and the audience for attending. Additionally, I would love to say a huge thank you to our co-sponsor, the California Opportunity Youth Network, for their support in preparing and all of the data and information that was shared with us today. As a registrant of this webinar, we will be sure to follow up with resources spotlighted in today's discussion, as well as our new Opportunity Youth case statement. And don't forget to sign on to our newsletter to stay up to date on all things Unite LA. I hope everyone takes care of themselves and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.